All right, buckle up, because today we're taking a deep dive into a world that's been generating a lot of buzz.
Hmm. I'd say more than buzz, maybe even some controversy.
That's fair.
Yeah.
The Science of Identity Foundation.
You see,
See, yeah, right. You want to get to the bottom of who Chris Butler is and what this whole organization is really all about?
right.
We've got a mountain of articles here, legal documents, forum posts, you name it, and let me tell you,
It's a wild ride.
yeah, it's wild, it's complicated, but it's a fascinating story. So let's dig in.
Okay, sounds good.
So to start, one thing that really struck me going through all this
Yeah.
is how spirituality and politics and even money, like it all gets tangled up together.
Yeah.
And it just raises so many questions.
Absolutely.
Like we're talking potential cult activity, some seriously questionable business dealings, and of course a whole political influence angle. It's a lot to unpack. So let's start with Chris Butler himself, right? Like, who is this guy? What's his deal?
Well, he's definitely a complicated character. Born Chris Butler, later takes on the name Jagadguru Siddhaswarupananda Paramahamsa.
Try saying that 3 times fast.
Right. Exactly. And his early years were spent following the teachings of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Okay, so the founder of ISKCON, the Hare Krishna movement.
That's right.
All right, so that seems pretty traditional, pretty standard spiritual path. What happened?
Well, that's the thing. Instead of sticking solely with those religious teachings, Butler kind of shifted gears. He started urging his followers to get into politics, particularly in Hawaii.
Interesting.
And this eventually led to the creation of the Independence for Godly Government Party back in the mid-70s.
Wow, talk about a career change, going
Yeah.
from spiritual leader to political party founder.
Right. It's a big leap.
It is, it's quite a leap.
Yeah.
So is this where the Science of Identity Foundation comes in?
You got it.
Okay.
The Sikh half, it's Butler's baby. On paper, it's registered as a charity, a religious charity, but there's a whole lot of accusations swirling around about cult-like practices happening inside the organization.
And some of these details we found, like some of the stuff former members are alleging, it's really disturbing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isolation, being pressured to give money, financial exploitation, and even Butler himself behaving abusively.
It paints a very troubling picture.
It does.
And it just makes you question the whole ethical impact this organization might be having on its followers. What kind of control are we talking about here?
Like, for example, one former member described Butler flying off the handle because a disciple used TISP money to buy him a lei, just like a simple lei. And it's just one example, but it really shows you the kind of power dynamics we're dealing with here.
Yeah, and there are allegations that are even more troubling. Like, this really stood out to me.
Okay.
Butler said, and I quote, "Tell Jay I don't want to see his face, but because I have to talk to him and deal with him, he can wear a bag over his head, then I don't have to see his face." Like, what is that?
It's really creepy, right? It makes you wonder about the psychological manipulation that might be going on.
Yeah.
Like, is this causing harm? Are people being harmed?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, so it's not just about the members themselves, right?
Yeah.
Because we're also seeing from these sources potential connections to Hawaiian politics.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Names like former Hawaii State Senator Rick Reed and current Maui Councilman Wayne Nishik are mentioned
Right.
as potential devotees of Butler.
Hmm.
And if that's true, you have to ask, are religious beliefs being used for political gain?
Yeah, it just brings up all those questions about conflicts of interest, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you can't talk about SIF without talking about the Gabbard family.
Oh, right, the Gabbards.
Mike, Carol, and of course, their daughter, Tulsi, a pretty big name in U.S. politics.
Huge name.
Yeah, and their connection to SIF has caused quite a stir.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, it adds another layer of, intrigue to the whole thing, right?
For sure.
Because it makes you wonder, has SIF influenced their political views? And if so, what does that mean for transparency in politics?
Exactly. Like, what kind of influence are we talking about here?
Right. And is there undue influence?
Right.
It's something voters should definitely be aware of.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got the spiritual aspect, the political aspect, but we can't forget about the money.
Oh, the money trail always leads somewhere interesting.
Right. Especially when it comes to SIF and their connection to Down to Earth.
Oh, yeah, the vegetarian grocery chain. Everybody loves Down to Earth.
Right. It's pretty popular in Hawaii.
It is.
And it's the financial structure that's really key here, because the sources suggest a link between Down to Earth's parent company, Healthies, Inc., and a big player in the SIF network, Joseph Bismark, also known as Japadas.
Okay, so Bismarck, he was also involved with this multi-level marketing company called QNet.
And this is where things get even more interesting, or maybe I should say more concerning.
More concerning, yeah.
Because QNet has been accused of basically running a pyramid scheme
Oh, wow.
in multiple countries.
Yeah, not good.
No, resulting in, legal trouble, arrests, the whole 9 yards.
It makes you think, what are SIF's financial dealings really all about? Like, what are their ethical standards? It just throws up a lot of red flags.
It's just crazy how all these seemingly separate things, spirituality, politics, now potentially shady business practices, like it's all connected.
It's a puzzle, and we're just starting to put the pieces together.
Right. We've got to look closely at all these connections and ask some hard questions about, what are the motivations here?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are people doing? What are they after?
It's a deep dive, and we're going deep.
Yeah. And speaking of going deep, we can't forget about the human side of this.
Oh, of course.
The personal stories from former SIF members, they really bring this whole thing to life.
They do.
And honestly, some of their accounts are just heartbreaking.
Yeah. It's tough to hear what some of these folks have gone through.
Yeah, I mean, their experiences offer a glimpse into what it might actually be like inside SIF.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just accusations. These are real people talking about how they were affected, how they were impacted by this organization.
Right.
It adds a whole other dimension to this deep dive.
We hear from people like Ian Koviak and Rama Ranson who say they had to sit through Butler's homophobic lectures. They were basically taught to worship him and his wife, Wailana, like they were divine figures.
Wow, that's intense.
Right. And some former members even talk about being exposed to disturbing teachings about sex as children, which is just...
That's very concerning.
Yeah, very disturbing.
Definitely raises serious concerns about, like, the psychological and emotional well-being of SIF members, especially the kids, Are they being exposed to harmful stuff?
Yeah.
And are they being protected?
That's the big question.
Big question.
Okay, and these homophobic views, they weren't just contained within SIF, right?
Oh, no, definitely not.
Mike Gabbard, his political career was really defined by his anti-gay activism.
Right. He founded Stop Promoting Homosexuality International.
And he was very vocal against gay marriage in Hawaii.
Yep. Even produced videos, some with allegedly graphic content that were shown in SIF schools.
Yeah, I mean, that's particularly troubling, right?
It is.
Thinking about the potential impact on young, impressionable minds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's such a contrast to his daughter, Tulsi Gabbard, who later came out in support of marriage equality.
It's an interesting evolution, but it's tough to say for sure if it was a genuine change of heart or more of a strategic political move.
Right.
But it does show you how personal beliefs, political strategy, public perception, it all gets mixed up together.
It's a mess.
Yeah, for sure.
It's all starting to feel like this massive web of relationships and beliefs and actions all tangled up together.
It's a tangled web, no doubt about it. And as we keep digging, it's important to stay objective.
Right. We've got to keep our heads on straight.
And consider all sides of the story.
Because there's a lot more to uncover here. And the deeper we go, the more questions we're going to have.
Oh, yeah, we're just getting started. It really is like peeling back the layers of an onion with this, isn't it?
Oh, it totally is.
Every time we uncover something about SIF, it's like, oh, wait, there's another layer and another layer.
Right, exactly. And speaking of layers, we got to talk about Patrick Bowler.
Oh, yeah, Bowler.
This guy, the convicted drug trafficker.
Right, right.
We mentioned him earlier.
His story, it's like a perfect example of all these contradictions we keep seeing with SIF, this whole blurred lines thing.
Yeah.
Like, here's this guy, he's living the vegan yoga fanatic lifestyle, right?
Right.
But at the same time, he's smuggling tons of hashish into the U.S.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Talk about cognitive dissonance, Rick.
So can we go back to that term for a second? Cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, sure.
What does that even mean? How does it apply here?
So cognitive dissonance is basically like that mental discomfort we feel when we have beliefs that clash with each other, or when our actions don't line up with our values. Like we're doing something that we know deep down maybe isn't right.
Okay.
So in Bowler's case, you've got this outward persona, this health-conscious spiritual dude.
Yeah.
But then he's involved in this huge drug trafficking operation.
Okay, so two very different things going on.
Very different.
So how does that relate back to SIF and the people in it?
Well, if you're a devout SIF member, right, you really believe in the teachings. And then you see these key figures like Bowler doing things that totally contradict those teachings.
Yeah.
It's going to create that cognitive dissonance.
So they're stuck with these two conflicting ideas in their head.
Exactly. They might struggle to reconcile their faith in Sif with what they see actually happening. Like, how can this organization be so pure and spiritual when people like Bowler are doing these things? It just doesn't add up.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then, to make things even more complicated, the sources suggest that after Bowler gets busted, right, his money dries up.
Right, no more donations coming from him.
Sis allegedly starts demanding even more money from its members.
Really?
Yeah, like, hey, we need you to step up and fill the gap.
That seems pretty bold, especially if people are already having these doubts.
It's a risky move for sure, and it definitely makes you question their financial transparency, you know?
Yeah.
Like, are they really worried about their members' spiritual well-being, or is money the real priority here?
It's a good question, and it seems like this whole emphasis on money might even be tied to Butler's teachings.
Oh, how so?
Well, some former members said they were taught that material wealth was a sign of spiritual favor.
That's interesting. It's like they're twisting traditional religious ideas maybe to justify this focus on getting rich.
It's definitely a far cry from the usual message of simplicity and detachment you hear in spiritual circles.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like renounce your worldly possessions and all that.
Yeah, totally different vibe.
And then you have these sources mentioning Butler being compared to the Hindu deity, Gaur.
Oh.
That's a pretty bold comparison, don't you think?
It's a huge statement, and it really shows you the level of, like, idolization and unquestioning devotion that seemed to be happening within Sif.
Yeah, putting Butler on this pedestal like a godlike figure.
Exactly, and when that happens, it creates this power dynamic where nobody can challenge him or question what he's doing.
Right, because he's basically infallible at that point.
Right.
And it wasn't just Butler. His wife, Wailana, was also revered in the organization, right?
Oh, absolutely. She had a position of authority in Sif, which just reinforces this whole hierarchical structure and the power imbalances we've been talking about.
So it's this environment where questioning or disagreeing is probably not encouraged.
Probably not. Yeah.
And we've already talked about Mike Gabbard and those controversial videos he made.
Right, promoting homophobic views.
But the fact that those were allegedly shown in SIF schools, that's really concerning.
Yeah, exposing kids to that kind of harmful ideology is just, it's wrong. It raises serious ethical questions about SIF's responsibility to protect its younger members.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, are they actually looking out for these kids?
And it ties back to that bigger issue of SIF's potential influence in Hawaiian politics, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to wonder if these kinds of views, are they seeping into the political sphere through these connections?
It's a legitimate concern, and voters need to know about it. You know, they need to think about how these potential links could be affecting policy decisions.
Right.
Transparency is so important in a democracy.
This whole situation just makes you wonder about accountability and oversight. Like, how can an organization with these practices, with these connections, how can it operate with seemingly so little scrutiny?
It's complicated because religious organizations often have a certain level of autonomy and protection.
Right.
But when you have these serious allegations of harm and manipulation, authorities need to step in. They need to investigate. They need to make sure people are safe.
And it's not just happening in Hawaii, right? We're talking global reach here.
That's right. SIF is international, and there are allegations of some shady financial stuff going on in other countries, too.
Like what?
Well, the sources mention things like financial exploitation, money laundering schemes, all linked to SIF members overseas.
So it's not just a one-off thing. It seems like a pattern of behavior.
Yeah, it does seem that way.
And that raises even more questions about their ethical standards and their motivation.
It does.
This is a lot to take in. We've gone from cult accusations to potential political influence to international financial shenanigans.
It's a lot. Yeah. And we're not done yet.
Oh, boy.
There's another layer to this whole story that we need to explore.
Okay, what's that?
SIF's relationship with Khan, the Hare Krishna movement.
Right, where Butler came from originally.
Exactly. And that relationship, let's just say it's complicated.
I was going to say, it seems pretty messy.
It is. It's messy. There's a history of conflict between Butler and SIF and Khan.
Oh, really?
They've been accused of misrepresenting Khan teachings, even trying to poach members.
So it's like they're trying to create their own little offshoot of the Hare Krishna movement.
That's one way to look at it, but it's important to note that Khan has very publicly distanced themselves from Butler and SIF.
Wow.
They've condemned their practices, they've condemned their teachings.
So even with all this controversy, with accusations, even condemnation from their own spiritual roots, SIF is still going strong. They're still attracting followers.
It's a testament to how powerful belief systems can be and how much humans crave that sense of belonging, that sense of community.
Yeah, I get that.
People are drawn to charismatic leaders, to groups that promise purpose, even if those groups are doing questionable things.
It's fascinating, but it's also scary, how an organization with so much baggage can still thrive like this.
Yeah, it is a bit scary.
Is it all about recruitment techniques? Indoctrination?
It's possible they might have figured out ways to control information, to discourage critical thinking, to keep a tight hold on their members.
So even in today's world, with all the information we have at our fingertips, manipulation and exploitation can still happen.
It's a sobering thought, for sure.
Yeah.
It shows how important it is to be able to think critically,
Hmm.
to be media literate, to know how to separate fact from fiction.
Especially online?
Especially online, yeah. There's so much information out there, it's easy to get lost.
Okay, so after all this, after this deep dive into SIF, what have we learned? What's the takeaway?
I think the main takeaway is that the Science of Identity Foundation is this really complex, really controversial organization.
Yeah.
There are so many layers to it.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to this fundamental question: what is SIF really all about?
Right. Is it a legitimate spiritual path?
Or is it something darker, maybe even a cult, designed to benefit Chris Butler and his inner circle?
And I think that's what we've been trying to figure out this whole time, right?
We've seen evidence that supports both sides. We've heard from former members who found comfort and community in SIF. But then we've also heard these disturbing allegations of manipulation, exploitation, and harm.
Right. And we can't ignore those red flags.
We can't. Like, the isolation of members, the pressure to donate money, the way Butler and his wife are put on this pedestal, the potential for political influence, and then promoting homophobic views, especially in their schools. These are big issues, and they need to be investigated further.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to acknowledge the bravery of the former members who shared their stories with us.
Yeah, for sure.
Because speaking out against a group like SIF, it's not easy. They risk a lot by doing that.
They do. They can be ostracized from their community, even from their families.
Yeah, they put themselves out there.
Yeah.
But their stories give us this really valuable look into what's going on inside SIF.
They do.
We get to understand the potential psychological and emotional impact of these practices. It's a perspective we wouldn't have otherwise.
Right. Their voices are important.
Okay, so where do we go from here? What do we do with all this information?
Well, I think the main thing is, we've given you a lot of information here, but we don't have all the answers.
Right.
Ultimately, it's up to you, the listener, to decide what you think about SIF.
Yeah, weigh the evidence.
Consider all the different perspectives.
Come to your own conclusions.
And remember, this is just a starting point. There's a lot more out there.
Yeah. Do your own research.
Explore different sources. Read critically. Think for yourself.
Don't be afraid to ask tough questions.
Challenge assumptions. Seek out different viewpoints.
Have those difficult conversations, in a respectful way, of course.
Of course.
Because forming your own informed opinions is so important.
It is.
Especially when we're talking about organizations that make these big claims about spirituality, about morality, about truth.
Exactly. You got to be an active, discerning consumer of information.
Right. Don't just take things at face value.
Question everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Do your due diligence.
This has been a wild ride.
It has.
This whole deep dive into the world of Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation.
Fascinating, but also a little unsettling.
Yeah, for sure. But we hope this has given you the knowledge and the tools to keep exploring this topic.
Keep learning, keep digging, keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Yeah. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks for being here.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into another fascinating subject. Until then, stay curious.
Wow, it feels like we've uncovered this whole network, this interconnected web of issues with SIF.
Yeah, no kidding.
Cult-like behavior, potential financial problems, political influence, harmful ideologies being spread. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. It's like this tangled knot we've been trying to unravel.
And it all goes back to that fundamental question, right? What is SIF, really?
Right.
What's at the heart of it?
Is this a legitimate spiritual organization? Like, are they offering genuine guidance?
Yeah.
Or is there something darker going on, something more manipulative?
A cult, even. Maybe. A cult designed to benefit Chris Butler and his inner circle.
Right, and that's what we've been wrestling with throughout this whole deep dive, haven't we?
Yeah.
Like, we've seen evidence pointing in both directions.
Yeah.
You have former members who talk about finding comfort in SIF. They found a community.
A sense of belonging.
But then you have these other allegations, these disturbing stories of manipulation and exploitation and harm.
And we can't just brush those aside.
Oh.
Those red flags are there for a reason.
Like what?
The isolation of members, the pressure to donate, to give money.
Yeah.
The way Butler and his wife are elevated to this almost godlike status.
Right.
The possibility of political influence and promoting those homophobic views, especially in the schools.
Yeah.
These are serious concerns and they need to be looked into.
Absolutely. And I think we have to acknowledge the courage of the former members who came forward and shared their stories.
Oh, absolutely. It takes a lot of bravery to speak out against a group like SIF. They risk being ostracized, losing their friends, even their families.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It is.
But those stories, they give us a peek behind the curtain,
Yeah.
We see what might be happening inside SIF.
It helps us understand the impact of these practices, the emotional and psychological impact.
So after this deep dive, what are we left with?
What's the takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah, what should people be thinking about?
Well, the big takeaway here is that the Science of Identity Foundation, it's a complicated organization. It's a controversial organization.
Yeah.
There's so much going on beneath the surface.
Layers and layers.
And it all ties back to spirituality, politics, finance, personal lives, and it raises some serious ethical questions.
Yeah, we've given you a lot to think about here, but we don't have all the answers.
No.
It's up to you, the listener, to decide what you think about SIF.
You've got to weigh the evidence, consider the different sides, come to your own conclusions.
Exactly. And remember, this is just the beginning.
Yeah, this deep dive is just a starting point.
Keep researching, explore different sources, be critical of the information you find.
Don't just take things at face value.
Right. Ask those tough questions. Challenge those assumptions.
Seek out different viewpoints. Have those conversations, even if they're uncomfortable.
And remember, be respectful, even when you disagree.
Always.
Because ultimately, you have to form your own informed opinions.
You do.
Especially when you're dealing with groups that make big claims about spirituality or morality or truth.
Yeah, be discerning, be critical, be an active participant in your own learning.
That's right. Well, this has been a wild ride.
It has.
This deep dive into the world of Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation.
A fascinating but sometimes unsettling journey.
It has been, but we hope you're leaving here with more knowledge, more tools to help you navigate this complicated topic.
Keep learning, keep questioning, keep digging.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new and fascinating subject. Until then, stay curious.